So the next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the foot posture index, which is basically just a 6-piece identification scoring system to see whether or not a patient's foot is more pronated or more supinated. For each individual of the 6 items, you can give them a score anywhere from -2 to +2. The more negative numbers are going to identify a more supinated foot, and the more positive numbers are going to identify a more pronated foot. And then obviously, if you're staying at 0 for the majority of them, you have a more neutral foot for normal gait patterns. So the first piece of this 6-point scale is going to be looking at the talar head, and we're just going to be palpating it. This is like basically the only one that relies solely on palpation. So basically what we're going to be doing is, obviously we would do this on both feet and compare, but just for the purpose of demonstration, I'm going to just do them all on one foot. So what you're basically going to do is you're going to find the talar head on both sides of the foot, and you're going to be seeing how easy it is to palpate it on both sides of the foot. On this patient, it's pretty easily palpated on both sides. I would say it's actually equally palpated on both sides. So I would give this a grade of 0 for neutral. Again, if I could palpate it more on one side than the other side, that is when you would get into either supination or pronation. For example, if I could palpate the talar head more on the lateral side and not the medial side, then he would have more of a supinated foot. And if I could palpate it more on the medial side than the lateral side, then I would suggest he had more pronated foot. So for the second piece of this, what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at the supra and infralateral malleolar curvature. So if you could turn around for me, face just back, yep. And so basically what we're going to be doing is we're really looking at, the lighting's kind of bad, but we're really looking at the curvature of the area above his lateral malleolus and then underneath his lateral malleolus. And for this to be in neutral, the curves should really be about the same. Obviously, it's a little hard to see, but on this patient, it looks like his supra curvature is more straight, while his infra curvature is curved a little bit more. So since that's the case, that suggests that this patient is more pronated. So I would give him a score of maybe +1 because it's not that big of a difference, but that does suggest a more pronated foot. And again, if this curve would have been larger than this curve, then that would be suggesting a more supinated foot. So for the third part of this, we're going to be looking at the calcaneal frontal plane position. And basically, you're just going to be drawing these imaginary lines going straight down on the floor, the bottom of his calcaneus, and we actually already have a line on this foot, so I'm just going to use this one straight up the middle of his foot. And basically what you're going to be looking at is just the lining of that calcaneus. So looking at this patient going straight down to the floor up the middle of his calcaneus and looking at it, you can see that there's like very, very slight curvature going inward. Again, that would mean that his ankle is a little bit more supinated in this position, but it's really not that noticeable. So in all honesty, I would probably just give it about a -1, suggesting more supination. If the line from his calcaneus to the floor was pointing more outward, then it would suggest more pronation. The fourth part of this index is whether or not there's bulging on the region of the talonavicular joint. So if you could turn just like diagonal to the camera, yeah, right, like there, yeah. So this area, like right here underneath the lateral medial malleolus, I'm sorry, put this foot forward a little bit more, yep, just like this. Okay, so this area right here underneath the medial malleolus is where the talonavicular joint is. And basically we're just trying to see whether or not there's a divot here or there's a bulge. A divot here would suggest more of a supinated foot, and a bulge would suggest more of a pronated foot. On this specific patient, there does look like there's a slight bulge, but nothing that's going to be too serious. So I would probably give this patient a +1 score to suggest more of pronated foot. For the fifth part of this index, you're going to be looking at the height and the congruence of the medial longitudinal arch. So if you could turn sideways to the camera, and then again with this foot forward so I can look at your arch. Okay, so looking at the arch of this foot right here, basically what we're trying to observe is the height of the arch as well as whether or not the arch is kind of the same height and all the way through. So a foot that is supinated or overly supinated is going to have a lot larger of an arch because it's going to be rotated out this way, and a foot that's more pronated is going to have a lot flatter of an arch because it's going to be rotated in this way. On this specific patient, honestly, the arch looks pretty neutral to me. It looks like it's the same height coming all the way through in this area. It doesn't look like he has flat foot or overly or excessive like feet that are turned out. So I would give him a 0 for this one, being in a neutral position for his longitudinal arch. For the sixth and final part of this assessment, if you can go ahead and face the back wall, what you're going to be looking at is you're going to be trying to see if you can see any toes from the back of his foot on the lateral and the medial side. If you can see more toes on the medial side over here, that's going to suggest a more supinated foot. And if you can see more toes over here on the lateral side, that's going to suggest a more pronated foot. On this specific patient, coming straight from the back, it's pretty even. I can see just a little bit of this fifth metatarsal on the lateral side and just a little bit of this first metatarsal on the medial side. So again, I believe this patient is pretty neutral in his position, so I would give him a 0 for this one as well. So out of all 6 of the tests, his final score was a +1, so that would lead more to the pronated side. However, since he had 3 measures that were completely neutral, it's really not anything that we would be concerned about.